They told us the void was obedient, vast, indifferent, predictable when framed in equations and error bars. My day job was to make the indifferent legible, to fold raw photons into histories, to listen to the small, exact language of trajectories and redshifts until they told us where things had been and how fast they were going. For 12 years, I learned to trust the curve. An object under gravity follows a path. Perturbations whisper the presence of other masses. Nothing skips. So when the dataset from the Deep Field Array blinked at me like a misaligned heartbeat, I felt something colder than curiosity. The track didn't curve, it uncurled. The signal was a clean line across spectrum and space, a point of light moving in a way our models refused to accept. It wasn't just the speed, it was the grammar. The object advanced, hesitated, rewound its apparent position by the measure of minutes, then proceeded in a shallow arc that betrayed no proximate source of force. It was as if someone drew a pen stroke on a map and then, mid-line, lifted the pen and placed it elsewhere without any trace of travel. We called it Object K at first because scientists named their fear with consonants. I called it other things in the small, sterile hours, an errant punctuation in the sentence of the sky, a child skipping stones across an ocean we had always supposed flat. I remember the first time I plotted its motion against Keplerian expectations and watched the line refuse to conform. The residuals blew past anything the statistical models could account for. I felt the tiny prickle that announces a paradigm on the cusp of rupture. Word traveled through the network as calculation left the cluster. Anomalies to review, please. 100 hands, 3 continents, the sort of bureaucratic ballet we call collaboration. We stacked datasets, cross-checked timestamps, compared observations from radio arrays and optical telescopes, reached into archived images from a dozen surveys. Object K was present in all of them, slipping through filters and back into view, never quite the same twice, as though it possessed a private costume change between frames. At first, we treated it like equipment noise. I can still see Arjun hunched over his console, calm, methodical, running diagnostic sweeps. He has a quiet way of testing: repeat, reduce, isolate. When his scripts returned clean, we stopped naming technical failure as an explanation. Then we tested for lensing effects, mapped potential gravitational wells that might distort apparent orbits. Nothing matched. The object's path diverged from any curve produced by mass distributions in our catalogs. It cheated both Newton and Einstein in small, maddening increments. The letters of the initial paper were shy. Unusual kinematic behavior observed in transient point source, potential non-gravitational influence. That was a polite house of cards. The emails beneath the formal draft were not so careful. Some hypothesized a new class of swarm mechanics, an unknown propulsion harnessing interstellar medium in ways our lab notebooks had never anticipated.
Others, quieter and more dangerous in their candor, whispered about manipulation of space-time, a phrase we put on the table only after we had exhausted every other theorem. Public interest was a slow pressure at first. The news feeds dutifully ran our sanitized quotes. They loved the word mystery. Forums bloomed with speculation, dark matter craft, alien probes, government cloaking technology. I felt that bubbling spectacle like a static across my shoulders, irrelevant at the observatory, but inevitable in our age where every celestial anomaly becomes a headline. The thing that made me stop treating Object K like an object was how it reacted to attention. When we pointed more instruments, when more photons were demanded and more bandwidth fed into its track, the motion altered in ways that made my chest thin. It seemed to respond to our measurements as if those measurements were a language. We set a passive network and let it watch. The object kept a steady, enigmatic course. We engaged active tracking, and the path we had recorded folded into unfamiliar oscillations, a dance that suggested knowledge of being observed. Late nights at the array are always a theater of small confessions. People lower their voices not because of secrecy, but because the machines make everything intimate. I remember Mira's voice when she said, "It's like it knows when we look." She said it without hysteria. She said it like someone pointing out a stain on a beloved shirt. The phrase lodged in my head and would not loosen. We tried to test that knowing. We built mock observations, false telemetry fed to our internal logs, dummy feeds masked as legitimate arrays, deliberately scrambled timestamps. We broadcast deliberately noisy patterns not to the object, which was light years away, but into the global catalog in hopes of tricking any responsive intelligence into revealing a preference. For days, nothing. Then the object's motions synchronized with one of our false timestamps, not directly, but by a consistent offset that matched the fake delay we'd injected. It was a small, humiliating confirmation that something about the object's behavior correlated with data fidelity on our side. This was the point at which many of our collaborators asked for a pause. Science is patient, but not unafraid. There are protocols about active measures, about making contact with things we barely understand. A few of us thought those protocols were for monographs and committees, not for phenomena that rearranged the assumptions of physics. In the end, caution won, and that caution was experienced by the rest of the world as a kind of opacity, which the rumor mill interpreted as conspiracy. Then, the streaks began. At first, I saw them in spectral residuals, faint linear deviations present at moments of high activity. They were like fingerprints, pale and prone to misinterpretation. Our imaging revealed slender streaks of energy that cut across frames, segments of arc that corresponded in no simple way to the object's path. They threaded through background stars like scratches on glass.
When we correlated times, we found that where the streaks intersected, detectors recorded microfluctuations in fundamental constants, minute, barely measurable variations in fine structure, a hint that the object's passage was not only kinematic but ontological, perturbing the scaffolding of measurement itself. I remember the first time a calibration routine failed because atomic clocks miscounted their ticks in a narrow window. We checked for terrestrial interference and found none. Instruments calibrated in labs across oceans reported the same jitter. The clocks did not skip as human seconds do, but as if time itself had been briefly coaxed to a different tempo. It was ridiculous, like catching a paragraph halfway through a page and finding a sentence rewritten. The more we measured, the stranger the patterns became. Photons arriving from directions that should have been occluded in the object's supposed configuration. Arrival times inconsistent with light speed delays when cross-checked with distant observatories. In one sequence, we observed a pulse on 3 arrays separated by half a planet's circumference with an inter-arrival delay that would have demanded superluminal transit if the source had been consistent. Someone in the operations room muttered entanglement, half ironically. We did not understand the mechanism, only the arithmetic. Our accounting of causality had holes in it now. Personal effects followed the public arc of curiosity. Observatories near the object's projected path reported anomalous equipment behavior. Motors jammed, superconductors warmed, drive systems misaligned. A radio astronomer in Chile recorded what he described as voices under noise. Not words, but a slow modulation that, when stretched and shifted, resembled the cadence of a heartbeat. A deep-sea neutrino detector in the North Atlantic picked up correlated spikes during intervals when Object K performed its most exotic maneuvers.
though no plausible physical connection existed between a vacuum-bound probe and a saltwater neutrino cascade. We held emergency meetings that tasted of coffee and suspicion. Funding agencies demanded clear language. Governments asked for major classification if the object hinted at foreign tech. The phrase possible non-human intelligence appeared in a paper draft and was deleted by committee hands so many times it was a stutter at the center of the document. We reworded and hedged in the way scientists do when they must be precise, because imprecision invites panic. Meanwhile, someone on a fringe forum posted a simulation of the object's path rendered as simple points and vectors. It was ugly and beautiful in its simplicity. Users began overlaying meanings. The path had a recursive symmetry if you rotated the frame. It traced shapes that, when translated into polar coordinates, resembled simple glyphs. I scrolled through the comments and felt a vertigo, not because of the fancy patterns, but because of how quickly people imposed myth on geometry.
I tried to keep my private life ordinary. When not at the console, I walked with my partner through parks that felt smaller than before, as if the landscape had thinned while we were looking up. My son liked drawing comets in his notebooks. He drew one with repeated dashes like a stitched seam. I found that he had begun to prefer repetitive patterns, trains of dots and lines, and I would wake to the hush of him tapping those rhythms with his fingers. There was a charm in that small mimicry, but also an unease. Even the smallest contact with the sky's oddities recast the domestic. The turning point came one quiet autumn when Object K performed a motion that broke the comfortable metaphors. We had been tracking with a near-continuous monitoring campaign. The object, for reasons we still do not fully understand, executed a traversal that made no physical sense. In projection, it traversed the apparent sphere between two stars in minutes, but the spectral shift suggested it had not passed through intervening medium. It was as if it had folded space around itself, creating a shortcut without leaving the stress patterns we would expect. The metric changes in surrounding detectors were transient but unmistakable, curvature anomalies that could not be modeled by any known mass energy distribution. When the campaign data poured into the lab, I remember feeling an old animal astonishment. We are trained to be small with wonder, to parcel it into methods and appendices. But there are moments where wonder is not a neat thing you can file. It is raw astonishment that exposes the thinness of your contingency plans. I sat alone and watched the visualization spin. The object's track looped in on itself, then unfolded, like a hand doing a trick that reveals the wrongness in the world. After that, contact was no longer a rhetorical exercise. A correlation emerged between certain observational strategies and the object's subsequent behavior. When we increased spectral resolution in certain bands, the object introduced harmonic oscillations in nearby regions. When we focused arrays on polarized scattering, the object's apparent trajectory altered to incorporate small sinusoidal variances. The system's responses were not crude, they were nuanced, almost conversational. We tried to speak back in measured ways. We transmitted structured patterns, prime numbers, binary pulses, images of Earth and physics, friendly human artifacts. Every transmission was cataloged with the care of a surgical team. For weeks there was polite silence. Then the object replied, not in light or radio we could easily parse, but by rearranging the background, altering the apparent positions of distant quasars by infinitesimal angles. An effect that, once calculated, encoded a simple shift in phase that corresponded with one of our transmitted sequences. It was a reply that required 3 levels of abstraction to perceive, like a joke told in a locked language. In public, we framed it as plausible coincidence.
Behind closed doors, the excitement was raw and threaded with fear. How do you know when a response is not a trap? We are preachers built on the assumption that the cosmos is not particularly interested in our petty narratives. To find a thing that listens and answers makes the world suddenly intimate in a way that calls for humility. People slept poorly. Conspiracy theorists claimed the object was a hunter, a probe designed to catalog and then to erase. Religious groups found new parables. Investors poured money into companies promising instruments that could detect or even mimic Object K's maneuvers. The discourse was a swarm. Inside the lab, it felt like being in the eye of a storm of projections, where our data meant both everything and nothing. A small team of us, not sanctioned by committees for its absence of nerves, decided to attempt a direct observation campaign, the way field biologists set a camera trap for a shy predator. We built a neutral platform, a composite of optical, radio, and gravitational sensors that could be pointed with extreme agility and left to observe. We placed it along a predicted locus of movement based on the object's recent behavior and waited. When it came, the encounter was quieter than the headlines would have preferred. Large events in this line of work have a way of being mundane and devastating in equal measures. We saw a shift in background radiation, like a sigh in the microwave bands, then a narrow filament of light that unrolled across the detector with a softness, not the harsh edge of a mechanical object, but like a seam in fabric catching light. The filament aligned with a portion of the object's track and then thickened, as if inflated by a process we could not model. Simultaneously, our instruments reported phase shifts in the signal that deconstructed the rendering we had grown accustomed to. I cannot say we recognized intent. Intent is a heavy moral category we project into actions to make sense of them. What we observed instead was a pattern of behavior that prioritized certain interactions. It avoided probes that used brute force energetic sweeps. It responded to patterns that displayed recursive symmetry. It mimicked temporal sequences we had used in transmissions, rearranged them, and returned them like an echo, this time richer and modified. The sense that an intelligence might be at work was no longer a hypothesis, but an urgent interpretive strategy. On the third night of observation, my son came by the lab because I had promised him a cup of bad coffee and a view of the screens. He sat on the edge of my chair and watched the slow motion of pixels and felt comfortable in the way children do when confronted by incomprehension. "It looks like someone drawing," he said, and I realized how small our metaphors are. Someone drawing, not necessarily human someone. We did not get the neat closure of a handshake. The object did not land, did not transmit a name, did not leave behind a physical artifact.
Instead, it performed an operation that changed how our instruments read the sky. Certain longitudes acquired micro-variations in timing that, once compiled, formed a faint but repeatable lattice. We could not say whether it was a map, a signature, or a hazard marker. It was, in its way, a boundary. The world responded with the usual panoply. Treaties were drafted in hurried paragraphs, amateur astronomers argued with diplomats, billionaires promised flotillas to pursue it. The language of precaution hung in the corridors of power, imprecise and anxious. Inside the scientific community, we argued not about the existence of the phenomenon, but about the ethics of persistence. Do we pursue something that appears to be probing us? Do we withdraw and leave the universe unread? There were no clean answers because the stakes were not equations, but futures. For my part, the object changed my way of listening. Before it, I had measured and reported. After it, I began to live in the small anticipations that had once been reserved for lovers and parents. I learned to watch for the micro-variation in lab clocks that presaged a new maneuver. I watched for birds that altered their route a few minutes before a localization shift. I found myself making offerings of attention in the way one might leave milk for a stray animal, Small calibrations, gentle transmissions, nothing reckless. In the end, I think the universe is a place that contains both patience and appetite. Object K moved between the stars not to announce dominion or to leave a flag. It moved as if to examine. It had a curiosity that sometimes read like a test. It could be mercurial and supple, and if one allowed oneself darker thoughts, indifferent in the most absolute sense. It touched our instruments and left us asking whether the contact had widened our knowledge or simply taught us a new vocabulary for our own insignificance. We never learned its origin. We never filed a clean taxonomy. We recorded, we theorized, and we argued in footnotes and at panels until the public appetite dulled into the next headline. But in the corridors of observatories and in the small private notebooks of researchers, the object persisted as a lesson that motion between stars need not obey the lines we draw, that the cosmos has behaviors that can read and be read, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing is not a hostile force, but a new grammar for meaning. Sometimes when the array is quiet and the screens glow with a soft blue, I open the folder of raw frames and watch the points trace their impossible arcs. The pattern is no longer only an anomaly, it is a strange, patient sentence written across the firmament, and I am left, as always, with the human desire to translate.